Welcome to A Financial Advisor and Pastor Walk into a Bar, Revelation Part 15. Pastor Jason and financial advisor Benjie begin Chapter 4 with the throne room. Let's listen in.
Okay, so we're going to go and start off again with, where are we? We're number 4, chapter 4.
Revelation 4.
All right, so chapter 4, we did the churches. Laodicea was the last one we did. We did all the 7 churches.
7 churches. Yep.
Okay. Oh,
4 that had a commendation and a condemnation. 1 that had condemnation only, and 2 that had commendation only.
okay, so this next one, chapter 4, we're going into the throne room,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So this is transitional, I guess, because
Yes.
we've gone from giving, I guess, commendations, like you said, or we've been slapped on the hand,
Slaps
or
on the hand.
high fives to the 7th church.
That's what we should have been calling it the whole time. High
Yeah.
five or slap.
So we went from that, talking to the churches, and this is, you mentioned this to me, I never noticed it before, but that was the last time the churches were mentioned in
chapter 3.
Revelation.
Yep.
So just taking a step back, because we go from talking about the churches and giving them warnings and giving them thumbs ups, and then we're going into the throne room. And as we're going to the throne room, we start talking about the wrath that's coming. I think it's kind of what it meant to see. And then the last 3 chapters is New Heaven, New Earth, New Jerusalem coming down. That's where, the hope comes in.
Yep.
So I look at it as letters, warning, and hope, right? That
Okay.
comes into play. So is there any background as to why it was set up that way? Or what have you seen, or what have you thought with that, this being the last, or chapter 3 being the last time he talks about the churches?
Well, so depending upon your interpretation of Revelation, whether it being this is a strictly historical account of all things that have passed,
Yeah.
at this point in time, in that day, it could have been read that, hey, these are the things that are going to come within our lifetime or within the next 100, 200 years.
Yeah.
So one perspective is all these things happened during the Roman Empire, and now here we are in our day in 2025. And so we're reading these things as things that have happened.
Yeah.
Other interpretation would say, or the other side of this argument would be, hey, there are still much of Revelation that is still yet to come, even in 2025. And so depending upon that, it kind of gives a better understanding of why those things are mentioned. So on one argument, the idea of church not being mentioned between chapters 3 to chapter 22 is because there is this understanding that it is very explicit that through chapters 1 through 3, this is a message to the church at that time. And so then in chapter 4, that message just continues to the church at that time.
Okay.
So why continues? It's like writing a love letter to your wife. Or to your girlfriend at the time before she became your wife or your fiance. If you've addressed it at the very beginning and said, shy, I love you, and a couple sentences shy this and a couple sentences shy this. Well, there's no reason as you continue writing that letter to say her name over and over and over again. Okay. So that's one perspective.
I put a caveat on that. If I were to go and tell Shai, this is what I love about you, and then go and say, but this is what you got to work on. That's not going to work. I think she'd throw away the letter at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my bad.
Yeah.
So that's one reasoning, because it's been established. The viewpoint would say this is a letter to the church at that time.
Yeah.
Why keep addressing them?
Okay.
The other viewpoint would say is, as you continue on reading, there's this understanding of the 7 years of tribulation.
Okay.
And in the rapture, the rapture that happens, if you believe that the rapture happens before the tribulation, then what has happened is the church has been, and when we say church, we're talking about the faithful followers of Jesus Christ. Okay, so in the rapture happening, they have been raptured up into heaven, and they are no longer on earth. And so this is where chapter 3 and chapter 4, this division happens that then says, in that perspective, chapter 4 begins the communication of what is happening now that the church has been raptured.
Okay.
And so the church is no longer mentioned between chapters 3 or after chapter 3 until chapter 22, because the church is no longer on earth.
Okay.
And the church is now in heaven.
Yeah.
And so you don't find from 4 to 21, you don't find the church mentioned, because they're in heaven with the angels and with God. Does that help paint a picture a little bit?
Yeah, it does. And that's interesting, because if I remember the way that it went from chapters 4 to 21 or 20, it seemed to fit that narrative. At least, if I had that mindset that the church is already gone and they're all up
in heaven,
or wherever heaven is, if it's coming down, but they're far removed from where Earth is, and they're kind of looking like John's looking, right, as to what's going on. That makes sense. I'm light in trying to go and say that makes sense, because this whole thing is kind of crazy. This whole thing, meaning the book of Revelation, just trying to figure out it's like trying to find out what's going on in the Marvel universe, the metaverse, with all these different universes going on at the same time, and it's like I can't follow
lost. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, but let's go back to chapter 4, and this is when John was pulled up into heaven, right? He said, "Come on up here."
Yes. Yeah.
So,
the voice.
Yeah, and so I was gonna call him Marvin. I forgot his name.
Davis. Davis. That's it. Yes, Davis.
I'm gonna have Davis go and read the chapter.
Revelation 4 verses 1 to 11. After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I had heard, like the sound of a trumpet speaking with me, said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things." Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was standing in heaven, and one sitting on the throne. And he who was sitting was like a jasper stone, and a sardius in appearance. And there was a rainbow around the throne, like an emerald in appearance. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and upon the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white garments, and golden crowns on their heads. Out from the throne come flashes of lightning, and sounds and peals of thunder. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was something like a sea of glass, like crystal, and in the center and around the throne, for living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. The first creature was like a lion, and the second creature like a calf, and the third creature had a face like that of a man, and the fourth creature was like a flying eagle. And the 4 living creatures, each one of them having 6 wings, are full of eyes around and within, and day and night they do not cease to say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, the Almighty, who was and who is to come." And when the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne, to him who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders will fall down before him who sits on the throne, and will worship him who lives forever and ever, and will cast their crowns before the throne, saying, "Worthy are you, our Lord and our God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and because of your will they existed and were created."
But kind of walk us through here. What's going on here?
So over the next few podcasts, we're going to be looking at chapters 4 and 5, because we have to remember that when this text was originally written, this account, John's account of Revelation, it was not written by chapters. It was not written by verse. It is one continuous story.
Yeah.
And so, or accounting. And so 4 and 5 is basically conjoined together at the hip, if you will.
Yeah.
And so in chapter 4, we see God on the throne. In chapter 5, we see Jesus as the Lamb.
Yeah.
And yet those are not 2 totally different things. They're united together. So you see God on his throne as judge and creator and conqueror, or not even conqueror in that sense, but judge and creator and controller of all things, omnipotent.
Yeah.
But then you see Jesus in chapter 5, you see Jesus as the Lamb, the one who was chosen to take away the sins of the world, and yet he's the conqueror, this slain Lamb. And so it's important to know that 4 and 5 go together, even though we see them in our English Bibles as
Right.
chapters 4 and 5, two distinct
separate.
things. But so John is taken up into heaven. He's invited in, and as he sets his eyes forward, he sees the throne. And what's really, really cool is in verse 2, he says, I'm in the spirit, but I was in heaven. And the throne was set, and he says the one who was seated on the throne. So this one who's seated on the throne, we know is God.
Yeah.
God was seated on the throne. And the one seated looked, and it begins describing the appearance like jasper and carnelian stone and a rainbow that looked emerald or like an emerald surrounded the throne. So there's a few things happening here that's really, really cool about this. When you think about the throne, we think about judgment, we think about power, we think about control.
Yeah.
So there is this to the readers then, to the readers now, us, you and me, and those who will be here in 1,000 years if the world tarries that long. This idea that God is on his throne. Yeah. He's not waiting to sit on his throne. He is on that throne now, presently. So he is all powerful. He is all controlling. He's at the center of all his creation. This throne sits at the center of everything, and it's in heaven. And I think one thing that's really, really important to understand with this idea of heaven is we're not talking about this ethereal place up in the sky somewhere. Yeah. We're talking about a home. We're talking about a created place where God is inhabited. Right. And in his inhabitants, he sits on the throne. And so then we see the description of God read, and the jasper, the emerald around the throne. And I'm finding in my notes here the exact description of that. Here it is. So we see jasper. Jasper is predominantly a purple colored stone. Okay. And so there is a common belief that this is in reference, or could be in reference to the same breastplate that the high priest would wear. Okay. So when you go back to the creation of the temple with Aaron and or the tabernacle, Aaron is told to have a breastplate. And on that breastplate, there are 12 stones. Okay. And so 4 rows of 3. And those 4 rows of 3 represent 12 stones, represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay. And so each tribe is giving a different stone. Yeah. Which also represents a different color. And so there's a correlation here between these things. So when you think about jasper, purple, which we all know is the color of royalty, that's a universal color of royalty. But that purple jasper stone also represented the tribe of Benjamin. Okay. On the breastplate. And Benjamin was called the son of my right hand. Oh. And so when you think about the son of my right hand and what will happen here in just a moment in chapter 4, right, and also the fact leading up to this, that John in this vision has been grabbed by the right hand as well. Yeah. And so there's these things that correlate to that. And so we know that Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father. Okay, so that's the jasper purple stone, the Benjamin stone. Yeah. The second stone, carnelian or sardine, is red, possibly to represent the blood of the Lamb, his justice, his mercy. So this is a description of God, but also that stone within the breastplate represented Reuben. And Reuben was the firstborn of Jacob. He was the oldest son. Okay. And even though Jesus didn't come from the tribe of Reuben, Jesus is the firstborn of God. Huh.
Wow, there's a lot in there.
There's a lot in there. A lot of cool stuff. And you start thinking, and here's what's so interesting to think of. Whether God was intentionally communicating this message about the right hand, Benjamin, the son of my right hand, or even with Reuben being the firstborn and Jesus being the firstborn of God, let's just pretend that God wasn't trying to make that correlation. Okay. As an Israelite who knows their history, right, who knows their story, their mind would immediately begin to go to these places. Okay. There would be correlations being made for them and connections that would encourage and uplift them and cause them to have a sense of pride and comfort, even in the midst of their oppression. Okay. And so when you start digging into some of this stuff, you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much more there. Yeah. And it's fascinating.
So like it becomes a message that's a lot more relatable than it's deeper in relation. Yeah. So
To the original reader,
right,
absolutely.
it pulls them in because they can understand the imagery that's being put in. It has a lot more meaning than just what
Yeah.
we see, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That's cool. I think too. The stones are referenced again with the New Jerusalem coming in, and
The
I think
layers of heaven.
yeah,
They're the
yeah.
foundations of heaven.
Revelation 21 verses 19 to 20. The foundation stones of the city wall were adorned with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation stone was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst.
I didn't know that. I didn't remember that about this one on chapter 4. So that's cool.
Yeah.
All right. So
And so then you also, sorry, I'm gonna
Yeah,
dive
go.
into the rainbow as well. So then you have this emerald, this green color,
yeah,
this green jewel, and it's possibly representing Earth, since the rainbow is attached to it. But also this idea of rainbow can be interpreted as halo,
okay,
because it says in verse 4 there, and verse 3 at the end, and a rainbow that looked like an emerald surrounded the throne.
okay,
So rainbow can also be interpreted as halo in the Greek teaching, or the Hebrew culture at this time.
okay,
And so you think about this emerald halo surrounding the throne, and the fact that what could be interpreted as God is on his throne in heaven,
yeah.
but he is also the ruler of earth.
Oh,
And that's one interpretation, that the emerald, the green,
Okay.
is also a reminder of earth, that rainbow, and it reinforces the promise, the covenant promise
yeah.
that was made to Noah, that he would never flood the earth again, and the fact that
Yes,
that our
right.
God is a covenant keeping God,
Right.
and when he makes a covenant, he does not break his covenant. And so this is the nature of our God. He is all powerful. He is all controlling. He sits on the throne. He is in charge of heaven as well, but he's also a God who keeps his covenants to us.
Yeah.
So,
It's like a review before the final
yeah.
of a test.
Yep.
You see all the stuff that you talked about in the Old Testament here,
Yeah.
which I guess isn't the Old Testament back then. It's the Scriptures, since that's the only thing that's been written down. There's no New Testament at this point, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All
I mean,
right.
there's these writings,
Yeah.
but it's not been formulated.
As a New Testament.
Yeah, or compiled together.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's just what he sees immediately. That's just
Yeah.
his first observation.
So the 24 elders, then,
Mm-hmm.
that comes right after this rainbow.
Yep, verse 4.
Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on there were 24 elders. So my original thought would have been, 12
Mm-hmm.
would have been the tribes of Israel, that sort of thing, 12 disciples. So where is the 24 coming from here?
So the 24, it's not mutually agreed upon, but one of the common interpretations is that the 24 elders could be in reference to the 12 patriarchs. So the
Okay.
12 patriarchs of the Old Testament
Uh-huh.
and the 12 apostles of the New Testament.
Oh, okay. So 12 sons of Israel and the 12 disciples together. Okay.
Yes, that's the 24.
Gotcha.
The other idea is just simply that these 24 elders are representatives of the early church.
Okay.
And so now in this portion of it, they represent the church, and they're saying, hey, we know, we understand where our power comes from, where our authority comes from, and we submit that, because they have their thrones and their crowns seated in a circle around the throne of God. And one of the things that's really important to see in this is that the crowns they wear are not a kingly crown, like God wears. The crowns they wear are the victor's crown. So when you think about the Olympics, when you think about races, Paul talks about, I beat my body, I run the race. So that crown, the victor's crown, was a different crown than a kingly crown.
I see.
And so these are victor's crowns. So they have won the victory. They have ran the race. They have fought hard. They have remained faithful to God. And for their faithfulness and endurance to him in the midst of persecution, he has given them the victor's crown and the throne seated around him.
Okay. Going back to the 24, the number 24, that second explanation of it as 24 elders of the church at that time.
Yeah.
There isn't anything, though, in the New Testament that has that number to go and say there's 24 elders or...
Not concerning the church, no. Yeah. We see the number 24, though, multiple times throughout Revelation.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a couple of references here.
Right.
But in terms of, like, apart from the 12 and 12 explanation, is there anything else within Scripture? And I may be wrong, but I don't believe there's any clear cut conclusion that this is in reference to that.
Okay. Okay. Well, there's a lot of stuff in here.
Yes.
For sure.
And we've only gotten through 4 verses.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Financial Advisor and Pastor Walk Into a Bar. As always, Benjie and Jason raise more questions than answers because God has a message for you, and you're not going to hear it unless you open the Bible and read it for yourself. Thanks for listening.